Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. The Blue House by Phosphor. I should start this by saying how dumb it is to enter abandoned buildings. As someone who loves scary things and adventures, it's hard to let go of the thrill. And with that, I'll begin my story of the Blue House. It was summer in the Midwest, the humidity at all-time high, the perfect weather to explore some woods. My friend I'll call Greg, and I'll go by Steve. We knew a perfect place to explore. The woods I'm going to explain are in South Michigan, called Purgatory. The woods are known for one of Al Capone's hideouts, and of course, lots of teen drinking. Greg and I enjoyed the hour-long drive up north with the windows down and music playing. It was a perfect atmosphere for a day of adventure and fun. We had previously visited this place before and got creepy pictures and tried staying the night, but that's another story. This time, we really wanted to investigate Al Capone's old hideout in daylight. But when we arrived, the place had been vandalized so badly, it was to the point that it looked like a junkyard. With this discovery, we decided to skip on Al Capone's hideout and explore the wooded area. To our discovery, after about 3 miles into the woods, we spotted a blue house that looked run down, but normal for the most part. The siding was light blue and faded, and the roof didn't have any shingles. The shed to the side was filled with trash and yard tools. At that point, we were dying for a thrill, so we agreed to go in, no pun intended. We decided to investigate the outside first before entering the building from the front door. To our surprise, there wasn't anything in the back, just tall grass, and not even a back door on the house. We made our way to the front trying to hype each other up for the spooks. When we reached the front door, we noticed the condition of the inside. The floor was caved in, and the wood was rotting everywhere. The place was extremely dangerous and probably filled with black mold. Unfortunately, we weren't able to focus our attention on the deteriorating environment. We were only able to focus on the floor, flooding with Polaroid photos and film photos of families and children. I said to Greg, "Well, this is creepy," and he agreed. When I say the place was flooded with photos, I mean you couldn't see the flooring because everywhere you stepped was photographs. Greg whispered to me, "Did you hear that?" And I couldn't help but play it off as him trying to scare me. "Dude, I'm not going to get scared by you." I quickly noticed the sound from the other side of the house, too. It was like the sound of someone throwing pencils onto a desk. I know that's weird, but it's the only way I can describe the sound. "Steve, maybe we should leave. This doesn't feel right," Greg said. I said, "We just got here. It's probably an animal. Let's keep looking. I'm having fun." To my surprise, he started to tiptoe forward carefully so the floor wouldn't take him. I followed right behind, watching his every step, and it took us far too long to reach the opposite side of the house where the hallway was. At that moment, we realized what was making the sound. It was a man. And this man was big, not in a strong way, but overweight. Gray shirt, dark jeans that looked too big for him around the legs but small around the waist. His hair was dark brown and he had a really bad bowl cut. As we approached the hall, the man lunged for Greg, but Greg jumped back just in time. A blood-curdling scream shot from Greg's mouth as he evaded backward directly onto a nail coming out of a wooden plank. The man immediately lunged for Greg again, pinning him down to the ground, nail still in his shoe, piercing his foot. I immediately ran to the man and started throwing punches and kicking at him to get him off of Greg, but to no avail. I don't know if it was the adrenaline or the fear that made me do it, but I yanked the wood plank out of Greg's foot and whacked it on the side of the man's face. Immediately, the man yelled in agonizing pain, letting go of Greg and grabbing at his face. Greg was then able to roll the man off of him, and all I could do at this point was yell at Greg, "Run! Run! Run!" He was able to get up, sobbing and limping on his left foot from the nail. We ran out the front door directly into the woods, trying to follow the way back without getting lost. Running through the woods is very hard, and even worse when you have someone with a bad foot. Not once did I look back and fear that this guy would be running behind us. And at some point we stopped running, though completely out of breath. The man wasn't there, and I said to Greg, "We must have lost him." He didn't reply. He looked very traumatized. I felt so bad. After catching our breath, we realized we were lost in the middle of the woods, and it took us about 2 hours to get back to the car by using the only signal we could find to pull up maps. We went to the hospital so Greg could be examined since he stepped on the nail and had bruises on his neck. He was okay, but man in the blue house, let's not meet again. The Entities by Southern Belle. In my home, we see entities. A lot. I thought at first it was a side effect of a brain tumor, but when my dog and I turned and looked at something walking across the doorway of my bedroom, it was just clarifying that we were seeing them. Anyway, it never bothered me. Something I've seen for the longest time. It's the I see dead people. It fits to a T. So, the other night, or middle of the night, probably around 2 or 3 a.m., I couldn't get back to sleep, so I got on my phone and was looking at something. I can't remember what, probably a game. Anyway, all of a sudden, I saw a reflection on my phone screen of a man coming towards me. I looked and then thought, what the fuck, and I turned around and of course there was nothing there. But it was the first time something like that ever bothered me. I could see details like his hair. It was blondish and came out to the sides sticking out. I could see his build. He was stocky, and even the shirt. It was red plaid, and it didn't look like the thick flannel ones, but like the thinner, I guess just regular shirts. I couldn't see any facial details, but I tried to recreate the same position. That wasn't hard, as I was laying down on my side, facing in the direction of the windows. The blinds were closed. My face could barely be seen. Only a small section on the left side of the phone, which I didn't think it was there before because that's annoying when doing anything on the phone to see yourself. My dog was under the covers, but didn't see anything. But he got nervous when I was startled. One thing is for sure. Whatever these entities do, they scare the shit out of my dog so much that she has become extremely timid, but will shake so much that nowadays everything seems to get to her. I know when she's seeing one, or has seen one. She'll immediately get so close to me that she's like living Velcro. She'll stand between my feet, saying either hold me or protect me from the monsters, and she'll scurry up to get under the covers, or sometimes she'll stand up against my legs for me to pick her up. I hate the fact that she gets so scared. It makes me think the entities are either being threatening or teasing her. Whatever they're doing isn't good. I haven't had negative things happen directly to me. I've had things literally fly across the room, off the wall, turning the light off every time I turn around, but nothing ever to hurt me. I put a camera inside, and the one thing that it did pick up as it panned the doorway of the extra bedroom was a wave of light and something around it like a flicker. But not really quickly. It's difficult to explain the movement. When that happened, I wasn't home. No one was there. My blinds were all closed, and for the movement, there wasn't anything that could explain any of it. Before you comment that this is bullshit or fake or whatever, it isn't, and everything that I've shared here is 100% true. I do want to hear your opinions or advice. I look forward to that. P.S. Thanks for giving me a place to share this. I don't normally do. If you don't trust your gut, trust your dog by Terpio. I'm a 25-year-old female, and I had an experience about 4 days ago that I haven't been able to shake. I was dog and house sitting for my boyfriend, a 26-year-old guy, while he was away on a backpacking trip. My boyfriend's home is in a semi-remote area at the bottom of a hill at the back of a few acres of property. He's right next to the highway, which, opposite of us, is a small rural neighborhood. It's both very sketchy and very safe, meaning that the community is close, but people frequently keep to themselves, and there are a lot of abandoned or dilapidated homes right next to very well-kept homes. A pretty typical countryside neighborhood. So I really didn't feel unsafe agreeing to watch my boyfriend's property and his dog, Hennessy. Hennessy is a 115-pound, jet-black American Bulldog English Labrador mix. He's basically all muscle, and ever since my boyfriend and I began dating, he's become very protective of me and my own dog, Lottie. Lottie is a 57-pound poodle mix. I'm a dog groomer, so she's usually done up in pretty silly haircuts with bows and everything. All of this is to say that one of my dogs is very intimidating, and the other is not. Because of his strength, however, I can't walk Hennessy and Lottie at the same time on my own, so I usually walk Lottie alone and then go back to get Hennessy to walk him. We do about 30 minutes of walking each, and I like to take Hennessy after Lottie at night because I feel safer with him as it gets later. That's important, because this was the case about 4 nights ago. I was about 3/4 of the way through my walk with Lottie when I got this really weird feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I looked around to see that about 30 feet or so behind me, there was a tall man in a hoodie standing next to an older, run-down home. I instantly thought the hoodie was weird. I live in Northern California, and it was early August. It doesn't get colder than 87 degrees in the evening, especially when the sun was still setting like it was at the time. I forced myself to brush it off as I tend to be fairly paranoid due to my years of reading Let's Not Meet stories. As I kept walking, the sun kept setting and the streets began to slowly get darker. I would glance back from time to time and notice that the man was keeping pace with me, but not breaking that 30-odd foot distance. If I turned a corner, so did he. If I sped up, so did he. Finally, we reached the highway, and I crossed right before a car came speeding past, hoping that if the guy was following me, this would put some distance between him and myself, which it did. But that didn't stop him from continuing to follow me. I walked as fast as I could to the house, not wanting to turn around, but now being able to hear his footsteps on gravel. At that point, Lottie had noticed him too and started to bark and growl. I forced her to keep moving and thankfully made it back inside the house, slamming and locking the door and hoping that that was the end of it. It was not. Moments after I'd shut and locked the door, I felt someone trying to open it. The dogs heard this too and started barking because they always do when someone is at the door. There was no peephole on the door, but I could talk to whoever was on the other side. It is a pretty thin door. So I yelled out and asked who was there. Over the barking, I could hear a man's voice. "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" For some reason, the way he said it was so creepy. It was like there was nothing behind it. Kind of like he'd rehearsed the line or decided to say it beforehand. I yelled back, "No," and asked him, "Please go away." He paused for another second and then again said, "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" He started trying the door handle again, this time pushing up against the door. By that point, Hennessy could tell that something was wrong, and so could Lottie. The hair on the back of Hennessy's neck was standing up, and he was mashing his teeth while growling. At that moment, I don't know what possessed me, but I threw Lottie into the bathroom behind me and grabbed Hennessy by the collar, keeping him close to the door with me. He was barking and going crazy, and I heard the man repeat that he wanted to meet my dog. I yelled out, "Leave!" He paused and then slammed into the door. I saw the door move, and at that moment, I unlocked the door and opened it just wide enough so that Hennessy could get about halfway out. He was going bonkers at that point. My hand was starting to hurt from holding him back. I could hear his teeth clacking as he ferociously chomped towards the man. Well, that dude was not expecting Hennessy. The man stumbled back, almost falling over, and cursed as he scrambled to stay off the ground. He didn't even look at me and instead booked it up the hill as fast as he could and went out of sight. I managed to pull Hennessy back in and called the cops to tell them what had happened. I never got a really good look at the guy, and they basically told me that there wasn't anything I could do. But they did take my statement and told me they'd contact me if anything ever came of it. I am so thankful for Hennessy. After all of that, I snuggled up with him and Lottie that night and cried because it had all hit me how terrifying that was. I literally went out the next day and bought him the biggest bone I could find from a pet store nearly an hour away because he'd earned it. I also got Lottie something too. I don't know why that creep didn't get the hint when I had 2 dogs barking inside. But my assumption is that he didn't really realize that he was hearing 2 barks, or assumed that if I had 2 dogs, they were both like my puffy poodle. That is to say, he wasn't afraid. I'm so thankful the guy didn't have a firearm, and looking back now, I probably should have just called the cops and kept the door closed. But I hope that maybe because he saw Hennessy, he'll know to not come back and mess with us. Because if he does, I'll let my big sweet boy rip his arm off. The Discord Duo by Little Day. 1 year ago, I, a 17-year-old, befriended a young man, 18, on Discord. We matched each other's humor and had quite a few things in common. He was quite secretive about himself, so it was always a surprise when he opened up. We got along very well and spent lots of evenings chatting and discussing things. I got introduced to 2 more of his friends, well, more like classmates. I'll call them Steve and Luke. Their little trio had a strange dynamic. Steve and the young man I much later got to know as Tom after he finally revealed his name were quite close and tended to treat Luke as their little plaything. This made me feel rather empathetic towards Luke, and I tended to take his side more in any arguments. There was a slight rivalry between everyone in the former trio. My arrival only made things more tense, and all of them started to badmouth each other to me in private. Eventually, they started to avoid Luke and prevent him from joining our conversations. This continued for a while until Tom suddenly became strange towards me. He started to fully delete all messages he had sent me and unadded me everywhere. This happened a few times before I was fed up with all of them. I broke ties and honestly should never have picked them up again. But then one day came a message. "Hey, remember me? We used to talk." "Who is this?" I said. "It's me, Steve. Me and Tom started a Minecraft server. Mind joining?" I eagerly agreed and got invited into the corresponding Discord server. There were a few others in there who are not relevant to this story. I got along with most of the people there, but especially with Steve. Even outside of the Minecraft server and public group VCs, we'd spend time together. We went down internet rabbit holes about how Islamic pixie fairies with pride flags will save the universe and stuff like that. Our mutual interest in these rabbit holes filled much of the conversation topics when we talked. And this changed after March 17, 2024, when at 8:35 p.m. I received 8 missed calls from Stephen with the text, "Pick up. You'll never forget this." I replied, "Wait, give me a minute." "Pick up. Whenever I do call you randomly, it's important." The call went on. Now it was 10 of 9. Steve turned on his camera and asked me a short question that genuinely still makes me feel nauseous. "This is your house, right?" he asked. I remained silent for a good second and then tried to deny it was my house. Then another voice spoke up. It belonged to Tom. "It was surprisingly easy tracking you down from your mother's Facebook backyard view pictures. Ha ha." When I tell you I felt sick to the bone, I'm not kidding. I remember quickly putting on a sweater and grabbing my phone. At the time, my mind worked on autopilot, and I just wanted to get away from them ASAP. My mother asked me why I was going out in the middle of March at 9 o'clock during a rainy night. At the time, I lied to her that friends were there. "No way, you actually are real, ha." That was the first thing Tom said when I opened the wooden gate to our garden. Both men stood with their backs to the streetlights, and I didn't have the balls to shine my phone flashlight onto them. I remained close to the door as Stephen offered me a puff of his cigarette. I declined politely and stood there in awkward silence as the two guys stared at me. The conversation was very dry and not deep. Every minute I stayed longer made my stomach twist more and more, and it felt so off. I stayed there for about 30 minutes before they offered the following. "Hey, you want to go with us in our car?" I immediately declined and turned around to close the wooden gate to the garden again. Before I could, Tom quickly added that it was a joke and insisted on drinking a cup of coffee inside with my parents. I declined and desperately tried to get them to leave. It was now 9:32. I said, "Yeah, thanks, man. I feel unsafe in my own home now." Just kidding. Tom said, "Sorry, hope we didn't scare you badly." I brushed the weird event off and went on with life, though I did find myself checking more often if there were people outside waiting for me. Then, another message on April 24th, 2024. "Are you home?" I said, "No." "Are you sure? The lights in your room are on." I replied, "I am not home. Go away." "But I can see you, lol. Look at the window on your left." I went over to see them, this time in daylight. They had once again shown up on my doorstep together. This was the first time I had seen their faces, and Steve waved and nervously smiled. I nodded. "What is it this time?" "Want to go to Blank's house together with us?" I said, "No, I don't. Please don't waste your gas anymore to drive all the way out here." Yet they didn't stop. Steve begged me to allow him to go inside to fill his water bottle, and so Tom could take a piss. I said no to both and pointed for Tom to piss somewhere in the field next door. Eventually I gave in and took Steve's water bottle inside myself to fill. When I came back, they suddenly were satisfied and happy to go back to their car and leave. Of course, not before a weird request. Steve said, "Hey, can I give you a handshake?" When I tell you it was awkward, man, humans have this sensor that tells you how long it is okay to shake someone's hand before it becomes weird. Steve did not. A solid 4 seconds he held my hand, only to make the joke to never wash his hands again after that. A message on June 5th, 2024. "Hey, we need to talk. I really want to tell you something." After a long conversation, it finally came through what the intentions were. Steve told me that he liked me, and I quietly listened as he told everything. The worst part of it all was that he knew I had a boyfriend as well. I politely declined his confession and decided that that was enough. I was going to cut all ties with these people. Following that decision, multiple alt accounts sent me messages apologizing, but I never responded to any of them. June 15th, 2024. My birthday. A card dropped on my doormat. It read, "For all the tears and pain, grief also gives you emotional gain." That was printed on the front of the card, and inside you could find this short text. "Happy birthday, have fun." It was a funeral grievance card. After that, there was complete silence. So, weird Discord duo, let's not meet again. Ever. Something in the Dark Growled My Name by Dry Marion Barry. When I was around 12 years old, I lived in a cabin with my family on about 5 acres of land. There was lots of fixing up we had to do on it before living in it because squatters had taken over the abandoned property. But it was really fun working on it together as a family. When we first moved in, I loved the house. There were plenty of places to explore outside, and the most I had to worry about were the spiders, snakes, and mice that would find their way into our home sometimes. That was until I started seeing things. It started as just an occasional glimpse of something dark, thin, and tall running down the hallway out of the corner of my eye while I was on the couch. Then it got more and more prevalent. I would see the dark being standing there or peeking at me from behind things from out of my peripheral. Every time I turned to look, it would be gone in an instant. It would do this over and over, almost taunting me. I began to get intense feelings of dread, like something was watching me, waiting for its moment to strike. I especially remember the night when it was the worst, the night that I fell asleep on the couch, which is what prompted me to tell you this story. After a long night of having fun and playing Minecraft, staying up way too late with my online friends, I decided I would pop a movie on and just sleep on the sofa. After falling asleep, I awoke at a random time in the middle of the night. I instantly felt cold, afraid, and like something was seriously wrong. I lay there in the dark, and it didn't take long to realize that I could hear my parents in the room next to me having sex, which, luckily for me, only lasted a few short minutes. I couldn't shake that horrible feeling I woke up with, and I also felt grossed out by what I had heard previously, so I kind of stayed frozen on the couch in fear, hoping I would fall back asleep soon. Every ounce of my being was telling me to not move, that something wasn't right, and that's when I heard it from the kitchen. Something decided to make itself known that night and growled my name, almost in a "I'm gonna get you" kind of way. I remember feeling my blood run cold. My body felt tingly like static, and I felt like all of the breath had been taken out of my body. I will never forget its voice. Raspy, deep, and croaky is the best way I can describe it. I shut my eyes tight while shaking and praying that I could just go to sleep and forget everything. I honestly think the amount of fear I was feeling helped me fall back asleep, very quickly, as a sort of coping mechanism. I was genuinely convinced that I was going to die that night. The next day, when I told my parents what I had heard, we tried to bless the house and cast out whatever was in there. We anointed every door in the home with oils, saged every room, and told whatever was there that it did not belong. It genuinely seemed to work. A few years later, I found out that in that very house, my father was doing some real fucked up shit. He isn't in my life anymore, and I'm not going to get into the nasty details, but I believe that he was attracting evil beings into the home with the kind of stuff he was into. He was doing evil things, and he brought that evil into our home. I accidentally stole from a Michael's to avoid a serial violent predator, by Sol I.E. I want to preface this by saying that this is my first time sharing this. This happened in 2013 when I was around 12. My mom moved me and my siblings in with my grandparents because we didn't have enough money for rent at the time, and she needed to save. It wasn't a big deal, though. They had plenty of room, and I got to spend a lot of time jewelry making with my grandma, which in my little eyes was such a win that I didn't even realize we were that poor. It was our little pastime after school, and one of my favorite parts was the trips we would take to Michael's to get beads and materials occasionally. Michael's, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is a craft store similar to Hobby Lobby, and walking around in it is a little girl's dream when it comes to DIY stuff. One day, in the late fall, we realized we had run out of wire for a bracelet I was making for my mom, so we headed out to our local Michael's to get more. That particular day was in winter, so it had already begun to get dark by 5 p.m. My grandma, having vision problems and a bad hip, entrusted little me to run in and grab the wire and pay for it, as we had done so many times before. I was stubbornly independent, so she wasn't very worried about me. She parked right in the handicapped spot in front of the store. The sun setting and the light from the big storefront windows illuminated her car behind me as I walked inside. As I was standing by the display at the front, entranced by some Christmas decor or something, a man walked in through the sliding doors. I noticed him immediately. It was not hard to. He was tall, maybe in his mid-30s, with dark hair and wearing all black from head to toe. His clothes were a bit dirty, and I distinctly remember a big red D1 logo on his hoodie. He had his hands shoved in his pockets and walked briskly into the store, almost frantically. I just watched him. He made eye contact with me for a bit too long, and then continued deeper into the store. I was immediately weirded out, but thought nothing else of it, and went off to find the wire. I found my spool of wire, but getting distracted in the toy section was where I fucked up. That's when I noticed he was starting to follow me around. Aisle to aisle, I would be browsing, and he would just appear at the other end, fake looking at stuff. He was muttering to himself constantly. You know when someone says something out loud expecting a response, but they aren't really directly looking at you? Like that. As a kid, I didn't really realize what was happening immediately, so I just awkwardly walked away from him each time, pretending to not notice him. In my little brain, I reasoned that he wasn't following me, and walked all the way across the store to the wedding aisle to look at some stuff I had seen when I first walked in. I figured there'd be no way he'd follow me there. But, sure enough, while looking at the invitation cards, I got a spine-chilling feeling. I turned around, and there he was, right behind me, back to me, doing something, messing with something in his pants, doing something really vile to himself. I had never seen anything like that, and the sunken eyes he looked at me with still haunt me to this day. It took me a minute to process what I had just seen, but once I did, I immediately booked it out of the store as fast as I could. Jumping into my grandma's car, she seemed startled by my sudden appearance and asked what I got. I tried to explain what had just happened when I saw him appear in the sliding door in front of us, and the dread I felt in that moment was indescribable. He approached our car, obviously recognizing I was with my grandma, and he knocked on her window. I hadn't been able to explain myself in time before she cracked the window and asked him if everything was okay. The man gestured to me with that same crazy stare and said something along the lines of, "She's a thief. She stole from there." I was mortified he was trying to make her a suspect of me, and on top of everything else he had just put me through. Thankfully, my grandma got the same vibes I did because she politely told him to back away, and rolled up the window while locking the door. He suddenly yanked at her door handle, then swung both his arms up and started banging down hard on the car's roof, causing us both to jump and me to start crying. My grandma slammed it into reverse and peeled out of there. I've never seen her drive so fast. I don't remember much after that. Just crying and holding a $17 spool of wire in my hands that I hadn't paid for. We called the police as soon as we got home, and luckily they immediately took it very seriously and requested the videotape from Michael's. A few weeks later, my grandma told me that they had found him. They mostly left me out of the investigation, besides taking my statement, so as not to traumatize me further, I guess. She got the dent in her car fixed, and that was that. It wasn't until a few years later that my mom finally told me what had happened to this guy. It turns out, he already had 1 battery charge and 2 sexual assaults on his record, one even being from a minor relative of his, like his niece or something. He had just gotten off of work from the gas station across the street when he must have seen me walk into Michael's alone. I don't know what would have happened if my grandma hadn't locked her car door, or if she had been in there with me, vulnerable to that man as well. So, scary freak from Michael's, let's please not ever meet again. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on this channel or my podcast, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you are so inclined, please give a like to this video, consider subscribing to me, hit the notification bell for every time I upload, and leave a comment below. I'd like to know what your thoughts are on the stories I just read. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you're not following me on social media, feel free to do that. There's links to that in the description. And if you'd like to take your support of the channel a step further, find the link to my Patreon page and check out some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise at my TeePublic storefront. Link to that is below. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.